Addishes College, how you doing? It's the last week of September. We're going into October, and it's raining. It actually feels like fall out there. Hope y'all doing well. Had a good weekend. I caught up on the grading. All the essays are graded. Hope you aren't too disappointed. I'm going to keep explaining what I'm looking for in the essays. I'm not looking for a review. I'm not looking for if you like something or you think it's great or awesome. Don't use those words. Explain why it's great or awesome or a masterpiece. Explain it. I know you're looking things up. I know the research is telling you that, but I need you to put it in your own words, your own thoughts by watching the movie. I could tell when you don't watch the movie because it's all researched. I could tell you haven't watched the movie. Like, for example, on the Citizen Kane movie, I specifically asked you all to write about what is Rosebud meaning? Not what is Rosebud. We all know it's the sled, but what is the significance of Rosebud? It's not just a sled, folks. You know what it means? It means the loss of innocence. Simple as that. Childhood memories, nostalgic memories of a childhood that he never felt again, the love of a mother he never felt again. If you had said any of that, you would have gotten it correct. If you didn't address it, you lost points. When I specifically asked to look for something, you have to address it. Yes, there's a ton of research on these movies and it's all out there. The answer's out there, but I wish you could find it on your own without having to Google everything. That's fine. They do some research. I'm glad you do, because that way you'll get a deeper understanding of the movie. But the other thing is needs to be three minimum pages, 3 to 5. That means you can do three minimum pages, but it has to be three. Part of these assignments and part of writing an academic research paper in college is page count. When you guys go on to a 4 year college, I hope you do. Maybe you go on to get your master's degree. I hope you do. You'll write 50 or 60 pages, and you're going to want to understand how to write that that page count. And how you do that is simple. When you get into a corner, you think of another topic to write about. You're analyzing the film. Then you think about, well, have I talked about performances? Have I written about the direction? Besides saying it's directed greatly, that doesn't describe anything. Why? Why is it directed wonderfully? Um, what about the camera work, the cinematography? Well, in Citizen Kane, it's powerful. Greg Tolan was was discovering new ways to give Orson Welles the shots he wanted, and that's what makes that film stand out and important. Music, themes in Citizen Kane. There's a ton in there. Wealth, privilege, unrequited love, love not given, love not acquired. Money can't buy you love. Money can't buy you power and privilege, although it looks like it can for a while, but he died a very unhappy man. He was holding on to his last childhood memory because he was essentially unloved. All that's in there. So please look at themes. Please look at symbols. There's a ton of symbolism in that too. Why is the camera always so low, shooting up at him? To make him look larger than life. Simple. That's a symbolic camera shot that I know you've probably only seen the film once and you shouldn't maybe understand all that. That's fine. But there's a reason why directors put the camera where they put it to hopefully give you a sense of the inner workings of the characters. They're just not sending the camera eye level and aiming it. That's what they do in television. Because in television, they mostly just talking. They're giving you the whole story by talking. Look at any of your procedurals, cop shows, whatever is on streaming. They're usually shot very straight on and a lot of talking because they don't have time to do a cinematic uh, look to their TV shows. Some shows are getting really good at that, a cinematic look. They could put a little more time and effort into the actual visuals instead of just having the characters talk the story. Uh, Movies are a visual image medium, and uh, a lot of great directors didn't like a lot of talk. They wanted to do it with camera moves, with silences, with the actors performing in close up, and that's how they depict their story. That was more important than to talking the story to the camera so the audience understand. So anyway, keep all that in mind when you get your next essay, which I'm going to sign this week. It's going to be a foreign film, folks. Have you ever seen a foreign film? I mean, when I say foreign now, I mean one with subtitles. We have to read. We don't know the language. You have to read the dialogue. These aren't silent films, folks. They're speaking, but they're speaking a foreign language. Well, you're going to write this week about a very influential film that revolutionized the entire universe called Eight and a Half by Federico Fellini, Italian filmmaker who did many, many masterworks from the 50s, 60s, 70s. He worked until he couldn't anymore. He died in the early 90s, always dreaming of the next film. Eight and a Half is one of his masterworks. La Dolce Vita would be another one. La Strada, Almacord. He directed so many, and they're have his own. No other filmmaker has ever had that touch. What he brings to these films that are very complicated, full of symbolism, full of themes. You're gonna love Eight and a Half because you're really gonna have to bear down and watch it and listen to it. Yes, listen to it, even though it's in Italian. Watch the performers, watch what he's doing with the camera, look for the themes. There's a ton in there. Symbolism is Fellini's uh, genius, and he populates his movies with a lot of actors. They're very operatic, they're very emotional, they're very alive and sexual, more so than our films were at this time, without showing a lot of sex. They're erotic, sensual, and have a surreal quality too. They're surreal. Look that word up. Almost experimental in some of his visuals. Is it a dream? Is it life? Is it reality? It's all that, all mixed into one. Eight and a Half by Federico Fellini. I'll post it later. It'll be due next week. Of course, not yet because you're working on your paper right now, which I think is due tomorrow, which was either On the Waterfront or Row Without a Cause. Hope you enjoyed those films and give it your best shot. But remember, I need to see 3 pages, and please number your pages. Also, double space. It's too hard for me to read single spaced, and I can't tell if it's 3 pages if it's single spaced. I need to see the page numbers. Pretty easy to put those on there. Also, a great way, one of the students, I'm not going to name the student, but they really categorize, they break down their papers. They literally have bullet points, bullet point direction, and you'll have a paragraph about the direction of the movie, meaning what the director's doing, what he's trying to convey or she's trying to convey. So far, it's all been men. I realize that we're going to get to women next week. Um, Camera work, cinematography. There's a bullet point there with a heading: camera work. What is the camera doing? Is it moving? Is it up? Is it down? Is it panning? For what purpose? Is it deep focus? Is it out of focus? Is it rack focus? You don't need to know those terms, but I think you're learning these terms. Um, Themes, bullet point, theme. Here's the theme. Um, Performances. How are the actors doing? Are they conveying their characters? Are you believing what you're seeing? You could break it down into bullet points. It helps me to read it. I could go skim down the list and see if you're paying attention. You don't have to hit all that stuff, just to some of it are relevant. Um, I'd be curious to see what genre of film you say 8.5 is. Remember, you're looking at genre films this week. And I talked about it last week. I printed some examples of genre films, and I ask you to discuss what's your favorite genre, why, what's your least favorite genre, why. You know whether you know or not what you like. Horror, rom-coms, westerns, musicals, and much more. Film noir. So this week we're going to be approaching your first foreign. I'm going to be talking about foreign films this whole week. We're going to do a deep dive into foreign films because they're that important, especially right now, as we coming out of the 1950s, 1960s, early 60s are really important in world cinema. For once, we're coming out of World War II 10 years later, and France, Italy, Japan, Sweden, Britain is a foreign film, folks, um, are making films like never before because they had to shut down for World War II. We kept making films, but the war didn't hit here. Yes, we fought the war, but nobody was bombing us like they were those countries. So, foreign films. Does the word foreign scare you? I think we should cancel that and call it world films or something else because to me, they're human films. We all relate to them because it's the human element that's why we relate to it. We relate to what's going on in Japan, although maybe we've never been there. They're humans just like we are. They eat, sleep, they have desire, they have issues, they have sadness, melancholy, life, death, tragedy, comedy. S- Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Russia, they all have that same thing. All of them. And when you see a foreign film, you'll see how we're all connected. Yes, the clothes may look different. The countryside looks different. The cars look different. The clothes look different. Accents are different. But what they're going through is the human condition. And you need to see now what's going on in the world out there. And so this week we're going to be tackling the foreign films. I'll sign the chapters later on. It's the next chapter coming up where it kind of goes more in depth foreign films. Finish that chapter I assign. It will help you explain all the different. Um, I think it was on 87 to 116 or something. It's the last half of chapter 3, and it kind of goes through the categories or genres of film in more detail than I can on these brief, although you may think they're long lectures. I try to keep them around 20 minutes. If we were in a class right now, I'd be talking for 15 minutes. Think about that, folks. Anyway, so many films out there. I want to talk about um, what was going on in Britain, for example. In the 1950s, they were coming out of the war. They'd been bombed. They're making some incredible film noir type films that are different than ours. Um, a lot of them were called kitchen sink dramas. Meaning they were small budgeted movies around human elements. A lot and a lot of scenes are done in people's kitchens, like eating and cooking. We never saw that too much in Hollywood because it's not glamorous. It's not fantasy. But these films are literally based in reality. Bathrooms, yes, people use them. We all do. Kitchens, we all gather in the kitchen. And so they had this unfortunate term called kitchen sink dramas. But it started off with a play called Look Back in Anger by Kenneth Osborne, Jonathan Osborne. And it's a brilliant play it's called Look Back in Anger. It's about a guy who is living with two other people, uh, his roommate and the woman he's supposedly in love with, but they're not supposedly, intimate yet. They're just roommates. And he works in the fish market downtown, but he's He's a frustrated musician and poet and writer, and so he's angry that he has to keep working at the fish market. So the anger comes from not fulfilling his dreams. How do you do the next step of fulfilling a dream? It's the existential question we all are faced with. Yes, you're faced with whether you know what the word existential means or not. Meaning, have you ever contemplated, why am I here? Simple as that. If I was teaching Hamlet right now, to be or not to be isn't about suicide. It's about, why am I here? What is my purpose? What, why was I born? What, just to go to work, go to school, die? Or was I put here for some other purpose? Do you feel ever ask yourself that? Um, Possibly. I ask myself that every day. I've been living with that one a long time. Hopefully I got some answers over the years. Um, so he's exploring this avenue that a lot of young people explore. Played by the great Richard Burton, one of his first breakout roles. He's a British actor who had lots of acclaim, and he made a lot of really great movies and a lot of really bad ones for money because he spent money like crazy. He was married to Elizabeth Taylor, glamorous glam star, and they spent money. They're a glamorous couple, as glamorous as J Lo and whatever that guy's is. She's married to, or Brad Pitt and whoever he used to be married to. That they were that glamorous in their day, and it kind of ruined his acting career, and he knew it. He became more of a celebrity than fulfilling this dream of being perhaps the greatest film actor ever. He was in some of the greatest film acting ever. Richard Burton, Night of the Iguana, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, brilliant films. Um, Worked on stage. Some people say his Hamlet was the definitive Hamlet. So it was always there, but he suffered from alcoholism and trying to earn money in these big budgeted, lavish films so he could get a big paycheck. And so he made a lot of marginal films. But this one isn't one of them. Look Back in Anger, angry young man trying to break out of the mundane life, the ordinary life. Other filmmakers like Lindsay Anderson was working at this time. His early film, there were documentaries, but his breakout film was called This Sporting Life, starring Richard Harrison and the great British actors, Irish actor, about a rugby player who's trying to break out of the ordinary. He's trying to establish a life in a poor town in England where the prospects aren't very high, and he's a rugby star, and that's a big game. This is not soccer, folks. Rugby. It's, if you ever seen it played, it's a rough sport. It's like they pass the ball around with their hands, they tackle each other, and they don't have any equipment on. No helmets, nothing. And they could kick the ball like soccer. They play it on a field that looks like a soccer field, but it's rugby. Um, and in this film, like so many of these other films that came out of this era, these angry young men films, Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner, Room at the Top, Sunday, Saturday night, Sunday morning. So many of them were based on similar stories with the angry young man trying to find his place in the world, and he's dreaming about busting out into the greater world, and they get stopped by getting their girlfriend pregnant. And in those days, there was no legal abortions. There's no much birth control besides um, um, sort of birth control nobody ever wants to use if they could help it. Um, there wasn't much choice. If you got your girlfriend pregnant, your life was essentially over. You had to have the baby, you had to support the baby. So many of these stories have that element in there. It was very prominent element of the story. in a predicament that they find themselves in, and most of them end up losing their dreams, their hopes, their desires, and they settle for the job providing for their child and their wife. And they're tragic because they're unhappy. Everybody's unhappy, but there's kind of no way around it because society is dictating to them the way their life should go. That was Britain. I'll show you some examples. Look for them in modules. I'll post them this week. On in Japan, post-war was different. We occupied Japan for 10 years after we dropped the bomb on them. They didn't have their own government. We had censors. They could make movies, but they had to put their scripts to our censors. They couldn't show anything depicting Americans as being occupiers or the bad guy, or they really couldn't talk about the war. And so people like Ozo Uzo was making these films, brilliant films, Tokyo Story. I'll show you some examples of that later this week. Um, and Akira Kurosawa, whose most famous movies probably you might have heard of, called The Seventh Samurai, made a lot of samurai movies set in feudal warlord Japan. That was their version of the American West. They had these warlords that roamed the land on horseback, and they had soldiers. There's a lot of infighting, and they controlled different sections of Japan. And some of them adhered to the emperor of Japan, some of them didn't. Uh, Seven Samurai is a classic story of a village being ransacked by essentially bad guys who come in every year and steal all their food from 'em so they can support themselves, and they have no way to fight back because they're peasants, they're farmers. They have children and wives, and they're not fighters. They have a fighter's heart, but they don't have weapons and they don't know how to use them. And so they go off with what meager belongings they have, and they go out into the world, the big city, to try to find some hired, we would call them hired gunfighters, but they don't have guns there. They have swords, samurai swords. They're called Ronins. And the Ronins were bodyguards of usually royalty and rich families. They had those. And when they were out of work, they had no work. They had to take menial jobs. And they didn't like that because being a Ronin was better than being the guy who's cleaning out the spittoon at the bar. So these people go into this town and they find seven samurais who are out of work and need money desperately. And they go back to this town to defend the town against this marauding raiders who come in and try to take everything. In a war, these seven guys go up against about 200 guys, and it's the slaughters on. Um, Kurosawa knew how to film action sequences like no other. This is long before computer generated imagery. It's all real. He used weather a lot. He loved a nice, good rain pour. They faked all that because he felt the weather added a dramatic element. It's another element, and it does. I'll show you some scenes from that also this week. Uh, but he did other films, lots of other films, and he made them most of his life until into the 1990s when he passed away. Um, but one of his films is called The Hidden Fortress. You guys all like Star Wars, don't you? I bet you do. You probably have your Star Wars jammies still hidden away somewhere. Maybe you take them out once in a while. Maybe you sleep in them once in a while. It's okay. I'm not going to tell anybody. Um, that is based on Star Wars. Is based on Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress. Look it up, folks. Research it. George Lucas, who directed Star Wars, said, without that, I wouldn't have Star Wars. Now, Hidden Fortress isn't set in the future. It's set in feudal warlord times of Japan, but it's the same story. There's no Darth Vader, but there is an evil warlord. There's the good guys. There's a princess like Princess Leia, and there is even R2D2 and CP3O, except for they're played by two comedic actors who are kind of bumbling, clownish buffoons, sort of like the little robots in Star Wars. It's the same story set in outer space. Akira Kurosawa did some amazing films that have become part of the lexicon of our cinema, of our language, even. We'll be talking more about him later. I'll post some because I want you guys to look at those snippets of the films I'm going to show. I'm going to be talking next time I see you. I'm going to dedicate the whole day to the French New Wave that came out in 1959 60 in France, a new way of making cinema. And I'm going to be talking about possibly one of the greatest directors in the history of cinema, Ingmar Bergman from Sweden. That's going to be on Wednesday. I hope to see you there. Keep up on your journals. Story of Film is just getting started.